Hello and welcome to A Cuppa with Karen. Let's check out how things are going on in the Senate.
I'd like to ask some follow-up questions in relation to the question Senator McKim asked in relation to the social cohesion measures grant, large projects and national support. I've had a look at the extract from the Grant Connect, and I note the worthy objectives and purposes of the grant, and if I can refer to them: combat Islamophobia and support victims, develop communications to combat Islamophobia and racism, mitigate the harms of mis and disinformation and narratives that impact communities, and it goes on, and they're all noble objectives. Has a similar program been undertaken through the Department of Home Affairs with respect to what I'm sure all senators are seeing in the community, the terrible increase in anti-Semitism and the targeting of our Jewish communities in relation to anti-Semitism? Is a similar program being undertaken by the Department of Home Affairs?
Not specifically as a separate program, Senator, but I guess taking account of two things. One is the entire government approach to funding around this issue across multiple departments, including the Attorney General's Department and our own. Also, the funding that's been provided to the Australian Human Rights Commission to progress the anti-racism strategy. The national level projects that we're pursuing through this package of funding, all of the projects are primarily targeted towards the Palestinian and Muslim and other community as intended. But obviously, when you're talking about issues like anti-racism and anti-hate speech, that goes to a broader whole of community conversation, which would cover everybody. It wouldn't just be anti-Islamophobia in that conversation.
So I appreciate your response. I appreciate your response, Mr Kirkwood. But again, I'm going through these grant objectives that specifically refer to combating Islamophobia and supporting victims. And again, that is a very, very noble purpose. Why isn't there a similar grant in relation to, and I'll fill it out for you in terms of the terms, because I've got community members of the Jewish community approaching me, as I'm sure other senators here have, who are giving me examples of the most vile anti-Semitism, of Facebook posts, emails, attacks on their families, attacks on their person, anti-Semitism which is dripping with vile hatred. Why don't we have a grant that's providing for combating anti-Semitism and supporting victims of anti-Semitism, develop communications to combat anti-Semitism and racism, mitigate the harms of misinformation and disinformation and narratives that impact communities? And I can give you some examples of those.
I think I've heard those words somewhere before. The Trans Justice Project introduced federal and state anti-vilification laws, misinformation, disinformation, de-radicalise approaches, get some strategies going. Just a different topic. And that's the top of this page. I've done plenty of videos about it. So let's go watch a bit more of the Senate.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of quick follow-up matters on the Richardson review. Given the Minister's comment earlier, I think it's pretty important to put on the record that Mr Richardson found, and I quote, "We did not see evidence of any ministerial involvement in the regional processing contract or procurement decisions, and the Secretary of Home Affairs said he never discussed such decisions with the Minister for Home Affairs. We did not come across any matter of deliberate wrongdoing or criminality." But moving on, I share Senator McKim's bemusement about the timing of the release of this report, which does seem a little bit convenient. I note that Senator Polley didn't have any trouble getting across the contents of it in the very short period of time in which it's been public, which is interesting.
Very efficient.
I note that the contents of the report itself were quoted in Nick McKenzie and his colleagues' report in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and also on 60 Minutes. And of course, as you've noted, Ms Foster, Mr Richardson appeared in 60 Minutes. Mr Richardson's a very proper person. I'm sure he wouldn't have done that without authorisation. Who authorised Mr Richardson to appear in 60 Minutes and to speak to Sydney Morning Herald and The Age?
I don't think Mr Richardson would feel he needed authorisation as a starting point, but certainly he advised me as a courtesy that he was going to appear, but he did not seek any authorisation from me.
So it's a matter for independent reviewers of confidential reports handed to government to decide the timing and the place of when the contents of those reports become public without any approval from the government.
Senator, I think I was making a slightly different point.
That's why I'm clarifying.
I think he would seek authorisation to speak to a journalist, but I don't know the details of his appearance.
Well, at the time that he would have sat down for the interview with 60 Minutes and The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, which would have been at least days, if not weeks ago, the report was not public. And the report and the 60 Minutes episode went to air before the report was released this morning by the government. I'm assuming you're not suggesting that it's a matter for independent reviewers to decide when and how the contents of reports become public.
No, I'm not, Senator. I was making a broader point about Mr Richardson.
Indeed, and I know Mr Richardson, and I'm sure that he would not, off his own bat, decide that it would to become public in this way and in this time without authorisation from the government. So my question is, who in the government authorised him to conduct those interviews?
It certainly wasn't the department, Senator.
Minister, do you have any knowledge of that?
No, I don't.
Can you take it on notice, please? I note that Mr McKenzie and his colleagues also had access to the report before it was released and quoted from it at length in their coverage. By my count, this is the third occasion on which a confidential report commissioned by the Department of Home Affairs has found its way to Mr McKenzie before it was publicly released. The Nixon report and the Parkinson report were also quoted at length by Mr McKenzie prior to their publication. He's a very good journalist, no doubt has many sources, but it does seem curious that the same journalist on 3 occasions has got access to reports commissioned by this government into Home Affairs. Has the department inquired into how this happened?
No, Senator.
These reports are confidential and in some cases have classified elements. It's not of concern to you that journalists are able to access this at will, apparently?
Senator, you referred earlier to the reports being commissioned by, I think, the Department of Home Affairs. I think in
the government, I think I said,
anyway,
in the Department of Home Affairs.
I think in all cases they were reports commissioned by the government.
Right. Are you suggesting then it was the government that leaked these reports?
No, Senator, I'm suggesting that they were government reports rather than the departmental reports. You asked me if it was a concern for me. I'm trying to make a distinction between a report that I commissioned and had responsibility for and one I don't.
So you don't have any concern that there's a leak from the Department of Home Affairs of these confidential and sensitive reports?
I don't have any reason to believe, Senator, that any of my staff released that report.
So it's much more likely, isn't it, that the Minister's office released it?
I couldn't comment on that, Senator.
And because we've got a bit of extra time, let's have a look about how the Socialists feel about things.
And then there's the other aspect of it, which is, so this is from the right, so we expect this from the right. It says backward, the best thing to do is to smash it. Even their children are not acceptable. Even the innocent themselves are no longer innocent if they've been touched by political Islam or Islamic fundamentalists. And then there's the left. When I talk the left, I mean in very broad terms, talk about kind of liberal left and some sections of the left that simply see Islamism as some kind of fascism. It's a deeply reactionary movement, and quite rightly they'll point out to Islamic attitudes towards sexuality, towards women, and so on, to show that this is actually an extraordinarily backward movement, to the extent sections of the left describing it, Islamism as a form of fascism, Islamofascism. And of course, this is very crucial in the kind of popular perception of, if this is fascism, then we ally ourselves with whoever we need to, with Churchill if necessary, in order to smash fascism. So what you get is that if there's a fight between an Islamist organization, say in Algeria, and the state, even though the state's a dictatorship, we will always support the state because the state is more modern, and the Islamists are more backwards. So you get all these kind of things, and then obviously this is a big danger and one we need to kind of address and think about. It's the flip side of that, which is Islamist organizations. We won't even call them Islamists. Let's just call them by the name: Hamas, Hezbollah, so on. These are anti-imperialist movements, progressive. Therefore, everything they do, because they stand up to imperialism, must be okay. Everything Hezbollah does, we agree with 100%. So you get both these flip sides, if you like. One, it's Islamic fascism. The other, it's the most progressive thing around. And I want to say that these are both are very dangerous for us on the left. We expect the right to do this, so let's not worry too much about that. But for us, on the left, especially the revolutionary left, and especially the revolutionary left in the Middle East or in the Muslim world, these are actually really, really crucial that we understand and look and use the tools of Marxism, if you like, to understand, break down and understand our relationship towards Islamist organizations and knowing the difference between one type and the other, and how they work out. The first thing I want to say, and really, I don't know, maybe I'm underestimating or overestimating people, but Islamism, as we know it today, is a modern movement. This is not an old movement. This is not a section of society harking back to what it was like before the locomotive and the automobile arrived. This is a very modern movement that emerged out of the traumatic experience of capitalism and colonialism. This is very, very crucial. So it isn't like, when you talk about like the Muslim Brotherhood, it isn't an organization that can trace its roots back to like the 14th or 15th century or the 10th century or whatever. It actually emerged at a period of severe crisis inside of Egyptian society. And it's the same with the Islamist movements everywhere else. And there's quite a few kind of examples of it.
Anyway, there's plenty more exciting stuff like that on Social Workers TV and Socialists Alliance. So see you later. Bye.